Wayne County Treasurer Eric Sabri. We are living through unprecedented times. As a result, the Michigan Homeowner Assistance Fund was created. This fund, administered by the state of Michigan, is designed to help homeowners cope with pandemic-related hardships, such as delinquent property taxes. Residents may apply.
All right. I hope we don't have an echo issue here. Anyways.
Okay.
All right. Saeed?
All right. Off to the races. I mean, after that ad, welcome everybody to another episode of The Week That Was. My name is Saeed Khan, and it has certainly been a very trying week in the news cycle. So we have the perfect group of people who can go ahead and take a look at this from a lot of different registers and hopefully bring some much needed texture to it. We have actually a three of a kind today. We've got attorneys Steve Fishman, Joel Sklar, and Bill Seikaly.
The strong hand.
Yes, and for
we're
us
in the majority for a change.
Well, yes, but the professional Gentiles are represented by let's see, veteran journalist Nancy Derringer. And of course, Deadline Detroit co-founder Allan Lengel. So,
well, he's not a Gentile.
He's a Gentile?
I said he's a professional Gentile.
Oh, professional Gentile. Okay.
Yes.
I'm a Gentile sympathizer.
Okay. And we also have team Jew, team Muslim, and team Catholic. So it's a truly ecumenical.
Team Palestinian. Yeah. We've got a mix here.
Okay.
Is this
for the record? My parents would want me to mention we're Christians, we're Orthodox, but
yeah.
minor little detail, right?
I'm obnoxious, or no, I guess that's agnostic. I'm probably both. Two things can be true at one time.
Well, this is like Crazy Eddies. We got something for everybody.
Right.
Okay. So last Saturday, Hamas launched a strike across to southern Israel, certainly appearing to catch everybody off guard, not only in their reach, but also the severity of what occurred, hitting the headquarters of the Israeli Southern Command, but also going through a series of villages, kibbutzim, as well as a music festival. The carnage has left at least, I believe at last counts, about 1,400 to 1,500 dead on the Israeli side. And now, of course, over the past week, we have a similar death toll in Gaza with the expected Israeli reprisal. And now it seems the latest is that the Israeli Defense Forces have issued a 24-hour warning for northern Gaza to be evacuated, ostensibly somewhere else, as the expected ground offensive and further air offensive will begin. Allan, I know you've got some video of some of this.
All right, let me start with this one.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! أيوة روح يا شباب هجموا نزل الله.
Now we have to disclaim that is not El Paso, Texas, for anybody who was wondering. So
all right, now we got a couple. I'll play two others. And then we have one more.
It's the youngest who are paying the ultimate price. Tiny bodies covered in blood as exhausted doctors try to save their lives.
And by the way, there are politicians that are literally talking about our southern border and using the situation in Israel as a harbinger. So there you go on that. All right, who would like to go ahead and jump into this?
Huh. Where do you start, really? I mean, it's just so. Yeah,
Fish, I thought. Sorry, Fish, you had your hand.
I know where I start. I start, as I've been talking about in the past on this show. I start with Netanyahu. He and that group that he got together with to run the country have spent all of their time dealing with sending the army to the West Bank so they can mess with people in the West Bank, trying to get rid of the Supreme Court, trying to turn it into an ultra-Orthodox state, and somehow managing to miss an assault of this type. I can tell you this, my sister, who's been living there since 1975, was fortunately here with her daughter because our son got married last Saturday. But I don't think there's any doubt in her mind or anybody else's mind, maybe his own crew's mind. He's done. And he deserves to be done. And he's, as far as I'm concerned, he and his group, they're responsible for allowing something like this to occur. It's beyond my comprehension that the kind of planning that had to go into this was somehow missed by the Army, the Mossad, and anybody else that it's just beyond my comprehension.
Well, the Minister of Security Services is, interestingly enough, Itamar Ben-Gvir himself. And your view, actually, Fish, echoes that of the Sunday editorial in Haaretz. They immediately came out and placed the blame. And from what I understand, also, polling in Israel right now places 82% places the blame on Netanyahu and the government, and 54% are calling for his resignation.
Well, I think that the article, if you're talking about the article by Yossi Klein Halevi, that was the one that I read, and it's 100% right on the mark. The fact that Gantz and the other military guy, that they immediately turned into a coalition to prosecute this war, I guess is the best way to say it, and that they silenced these other two guys and some of the other members of Netanyahu's coalition. I found it, I was in the gym yesterday watching Blinken and Netanyahu on their television, and Blinken had to go and hug the guy. And if I were Blinken, I don't know if I'd have been able to do it, in all honesty, given what's transpired and given his responsibility for it. So that's the way I look at it. And 82% of Israelis obviously seem to agree with that. That's the only light in the end of this tunnel, is you're getting rid of him. And that's a big deal. I want you to know.
Well, as my wife's family says, from your mouth to God's ear, the demise of Netanyahu and the demise of Donald Trump, I hear this all the time, and yet Netanyahu, while under indictment, gets elected. He tries to eliminate the Supreme Court. I hope you're right, Steve. And I completely agree with you that the fault lies with him. Not just, though, for the failure of the military intelligence, but for not really making any efforts to try and come up with a solution to this problem.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting, and I believe, the Egyptian government claims, and I believe them more than I believe Netanyahu, because I don't think he has much credibility. They said, hey, something big is happening here, and he kind of blew it off. And then there's an article in Haaretz, the Israeli paper, that was talking about Shin Bet, one of the agencies there, had them and another agency were talking about the night before they were getting some kind of hint of something going on. They didn't know what, and they debated whether they should have, raise the alert levels in the country, and they decided not to. They said, we'll deal with it in the morning. And so there's going to be a lot of firings, Netanyahu, the guy's had 9 lives. I think he's just expended his last life. When I was in Israel last November, December, I talked to a lot of cab drivers, and the cab drivers and some people in the community, and people in the community as well on trains and stuff like that. And the conservative people were like, Netanyahu, we're not safe here in Israel. We feel we're going to be safer. The Arabs were like, Netanyahu hates us. And you could feel the tension. Netanyahu had not yet gone, taken office, but you could feel the tension going on there. And then there were 2 bombings in Jerusalem, which there had not been bombings in many years. And so this was all building up. They provoked the settlers into going after the Palestinians in the West Bank. And they've talked about basically annexing the West Bank, and they've tried. And Netanyahu always thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and he was outsmarted at every flank here.
I think one other thing, I don't remember who, it was either Tom Friedman or Brett Stevens or somebody else in the Times that said that really what he was trying to pull off with this rapprochement with Saudi Arabia, he actually was thinking he was going to be able to pull off turning the Middle East, Israel being a lot closer with some of the Arab countries, and he would do it without giving 1 foot of ground to the Palestinians in the West Bank. And if you think of someone who would think like that, 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, not a foot was he going to give to anybody. And now it's come back and bit him right in the butt. And as we just all said, he deserves every bit of approbation or whatever it is that happens. Put him on a rail and send him out of there. And let's get back to a coalition government that cares about the country and not about the ultra-Orthodox and doing something terrible to Palestinians in the West Bank.
Well, it happened almost, I mean, it did happen 50 years to the day of the Yom Kippur War, when Sadat sent the army across the Suez into Sinai. So, I mean, dates really matter.
One other thing, though, Saeed, I'm glad you mentioned that. Another great article I read, and I can't remember by who, the difference was in the Yom Kippur War, those were countries that were invaded.
Yeah, exactly.
And what you have here are terrorists, and that's where some people kind of get lost in the translation. This is not Egypt and Jordan invading. These are terrorists, and the kind of behavior and the kind of the killings and the rapings and the mutilations and the hostages and all that kind of stuff. That wasn't really where they were going with Sadat and Jordan at the time, and that's a huge distinction that I think a lot of people here, if they're not really aware of what goes on in the Middle East, I don't know that people make that distinction when you see some of the, I guess you'd call them protests in New York or in Chicago. I mean, what are they protesting? Yes, let's kill babies. Yes, let's kill grandmothers. Yes.
I think that, look, I come from this from a fairly unique position. I'm a Palestinian. I'm proud to be a Palestinian. I happen to be Christian, and I happen to be married to a Jewish woman. So
that's a
my position
got everything covered.
Well,
and you're part of the professional majority today.
Yeah. So I come at this from a very different perspective, I think, than most. And I can't support in any way terrorism. I can't support what happened. But that doesn't mean that I don't have some empathy or understanding for the frustration that causes these problems. And until we deal with those fundamental issues, one of the important points, and I think Steve was nibbling at this, occupations don't work.
Right.
They don't work anywhere. Apartheid doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere. You're going to have this kind of rebellion. You're going to have, because the difference between terrorism and rebellion is who wins. It's terrorism. It was terrorism when the Zionists were doing it in Palestine until they became a state. And then it was governmental action. I get all that. But unless we begin to deal with those fundamental problems, if you try to occupy that many Palestinians on the West Bank and Gaza, this is going to continue. It's been going on for 75 years. If we don't have a two-state solution or something, here are the two options, and I believe this with all my heart. You can have a two-state solution and not allow Israel to cut off all power, gasoline, and fuel to the territory. Not, that wouldn't go on anymore. Or you can try and annihilate and eliminate all the Palestinians. It's the only thing, like they did with the Armenians. Otherwise, this is going to continue. And I think that until we grow up and begin to deal with real solutions, these terrible things on both sides are going to continue.
I agree. I think what Netanyahu was trying to do, he was trying to get a coalition of all the Arab countries, and the latest being Saudi Arabia, and figuring we're going to all be together, and economically it's going to be so great for everybody that they're going to be like, all right, the Palestinians are going to get crumbs from us. In the end, he's miscalculated the whole thing here and his whole cabinet. But I think also what's important is that the Arab countries need to take some more responsibility. I mean, Egypt has blockading. I mean, we could let out all these refugees right now out of the Gaza and try to get them through the border, at least the men or at least the women and the children. And Egypt doesn't want to open up their border. All these other countries, they want to give money, but they don't really want to be part of it. And the responsibility is, I mean, Gaza belonged to Egypt. The West Bank belonged to Jordan. They don't want to deal with that. And so Israel is left, and it's more responsibility than just Israel. And granted, look, there's been a lot of, when we look at the Oslo Accords in 1993, and then in 2000, by 2000, supposedly Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister at the time, gave Arafat 95% of what he wanted in the West Bank and 100% of what he wanted in the Gaza. And Arafat was afraid of being assassinated by the radicals who were going to be, no, Israel's a piece of shit. You cannot deal with the Jews. And so there's been sabotaging all along the road. And Netanyahu has been also part of that sabotaging because his group believes, according to the Bible, the West Bank and the Gaza belong to the Jews. And so you have extremes on both sides who have fucked it up all along the way. And here we have the biggest fucking mess we've had probably in the history, really.
Yeah. Nancy, wait a minute. I just want to point one thing out. Nancy, I'm disappointed. The first two F-bombs were by Allan and not by you.
Sorry. I'll try to do my best.
But wait, Nancy, before you give your grievance, Steve, first of all, mazel tov on your son's wedding, but how come you didn't even invite us to sit at table 19? The
thing was, the only one that would have been comfortable there would have been Lengel, not because he's Jewish, but because he's tall. A lot of my college and high school teammates were there. A lot of my son's college and high school teammates, and there were an awful lot of people that were a lot taller than me. So wow. Lengel, he'd have fit right in. The only problem is people would have actually thought he could hit the ocean from the bridge of the ship when he
It's okay, Steve. I was off Kugel this week. Go ahead.
I
Nancy.
don't have a grievance, but what and I don't often say this, so this is kind of there's a good David Brooks column in today's New York Times, and he writes about the Clinton Accord or the Clinton parameters, what it was called, and the whole history of trying to negotiate this incredibly complex and thorny problem away, and how it was torpedoed at every stage by, he refers to them as imperfect people. He said, Yasser Arafat was never able to make the transition from guerrilla leader to political leader. And like you said, he was afraid of being assassinated, and he probably should have just taken the bullet. But anyway, back to what Steve was saying, and this is my email that I was sharing with people. I was struck by something that Neil Steinberg, who's a columnist for the Sun-Times in Chicago, wrote at the end of his blog on Sunday, the day after this started. He said, something we need to bear in mind, a nation in crisis tearing itself apart is not a vigilant nation. Rather, it is distracted, vulnerable. We in the United States might want to remember that in mid-November when our government shuts down again. We can ignore outside threats. That doesn't mean outside threats will ignore us. Israel has been reminded of that the hard way. And I think that's
100%. When there's demagoguery,
right, and with
tyranny, the minority, that's what happened in Israel. That's what's happening here. And
with Netanyahu, the chaos agent, the populist, the Donald Trump of the Middle East. Right. I mean, leading this, this incredibly divisive government. And look what happens. I mean, who has better intelligence apparatus than Israel? I mean, go figure.
You know what?
Well, Allan, you've got
and I'm mostly in listening mode today, so my F-bombs are going to be fewer because I can't compete with you guys. You guys, this is the topic of the day, and you guys all know more about it than I do. Go ahead.
What were you
Carry
gonna say?
on, fuckers.
Talk about profiling all of us, Nancy.
Let me
I
throw
like
one,
that carry on fuckers.
let me throw one more thing in there, and you have to be kind of in our age group to recall this. The guy who changed everything, which happens often with the Sirans of the world, was a guy named Yigal Amir. And he's the guy who assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. The best he ever had for peace was when Rabin was in charge, because he had the military credentials, and everybody in Israel went along with it, except for, of course, the radicals. And who was the one who made 2 or 3 speeches that almost suggested that Rabin should be assassinated? Nobody other than Benjamin Netanyahu.
And that's why Rabin's widow actually said his blood is on your hands. Leah Rabin said that.
Which is exactly true. Yigal Amir was a world historical figure like Sirhan, because he assassinated the one person who there was a chance. I agree with what you guys are saying about Arafat, but I think with Rabin in charge, there was a chance. And then this guy, and Netanyahu, provoked a lot of it. So that tells you, even back then, what kind of a person you're dealing with.
Yeah.
There's some considerable evidence out there that actually these conservative Israelis backed early stages of Hamas when they were a civil organization, a civil service organization, not civil service, but social
NGO.
organization, an NGO, they provided them with funds because they were Muslim nationalists and presented a divide with Arafat, who they wanted to divide. I mean, they didn't want Arafat, who was a nationalist, happened to be Muslim, but he was a nationalist. And like Iran-Contra, I think this has come to bite some of them on the posterior.
Mm-hmm.
On the tuchus.
And the tuchus. But I want to read just like a few paragraphs from the Wall Street Journal on the story, and it's just an example, and I'm not trying to in any way dismiss the serious issues that are here, but I also think with some people at least, it's just about pure hatred. And so let me just, it says a mob of Islamist Arabs incited by Jew hatred entered the town and killed as many Jews as they could. They went door to door, broke into homes of their victims, and slaughtered innocent men, women, and children. These gangs raped, mutilated, and tortured them while screaming, "Kill the Jews." That was 94 years ago on Saturday, August 24th, 1929 in Hebron. The picture is essentially the same, only that then Arab riots that included the massacre ended with 133 Jews murdered. This time it is several times as many, and we don't know the final figure. Then it says, given the events are virtually the same, question is why. There was no state of Israel in 1929. There were no occupied territories, no settlers. There were no blockades, no security fence, no checkpoint, nothing. And so I think we have, beyond the current issues, which are not to be dismissed in any way, we have a history of hatred in there. So
I've got a question. There's of course the inevitable comparisons to 9/11 that are being made. One of the things that I think 9/11 did to the American psyche is it created this tremor that we had the most powerful military on earth. We ostensibly had the most sophisticated national security and intelligence services, and neither was sufficient to protect us. And now here, similarly, one of the things that the Israeli government has always tried to project is a sense of invincibility based on having, similarly, at least on a regional level, the most powerful military and also the most sophisticated intelligence service with Shin Bet, Mossad, etc. And neither of those was sufficient to repel what happened on Saturday. Is that what's going on here as far as the feeling of invincibility gone?
Yes. I believe that for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that Israelis in general, I'm thinking of my late brother-in-law who was a paratrooper in 2 wars, that he was always confident, always, exactly what you just said, Saeed, that look, we've got, particularly with respect to intelligence, respect to the Shin Bet, respect to the Mossad, the IDF itself. I think that feeling, I think that's a huge thing when you live in a tiny country in a small, we live here, other than Pearl Harbor, people haven't invaded the United States. And it's just
that wasn't a state at the time.
Right.
And it wasn't an invasion, it was an attack. But yeah, you're right. Go ahead.
I think the hubris there, I think Netanyahu embraced that. Netanyahu, always the smarter guy. The narrative has always been Israel is always going to outsmart the Arabs. And I think we saw that's all gone.
You Star Wars nerds are forgetting how Luke got the Death Star, a garbage chute. He shot down a garbage chute and blew up the Death Star. I mean, every invincible force has some invincibility.
What you're seeing, it's like in Romania and Russia, the asymmetric warfare, which is what we're going to see. It's amazing what a populace or a group can do with very little technology, maybe a drone that costs $500 to fight this asymmetrical war. And that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a different type of warfare. The rules of engagement have all changed. Once you start killing children, women, and the elderly.
I mean, paragliders were being used here. F-16s are neutralized compared to paragliders.
Right. So you have a low tech and cause such destruction. And
right.
I think we're just going to keep seeing that. The asymmetric wars they're going to get better at them. Those who don't have much are going to improvise. That's what Hamas has done. They're going to get funding.
How many times did we hear that 9/11 was a failure of imagination? It's like, whoever thought about that? Who would have ever thought they're going to hijack airplanes and fly them into skyscrapers? It's just
anybody who's watched a Bollywood movie, because they're so outlandish in their plots.
I think talk about low tech. I'll say real quick, talk about low tech. I mean, I think the plan for the last several years has been stabbings. And
right.
we've seen a lot of stabbings in Jerusalem and some in Tel Aviv. You talk about low tech, but it's been effective in
works in
doing stuff. And now it's
But how can you not detect 4,500 missiles? I mean that just blows my mind. So here's a question: what about those places where you're not hearing much from, like say China? Or hearing rhetoric out of Russia, which actually seems to be putting this on the West. Bill.
I think that this is, I agree with everything everybody just said about these low tech and the asymmetric warfare. However, I think our greatest fear, if we're not careful, to Steve's point about this feeling we're not invincible anymore,
right,
is the ability of this to really spin out of control. If you want the setup for a nuclear holocaust in this world, it is Israel believing that they are truly threatened, have no alternative but to deploy strategic nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons. Once that happens, the Iranians, the North Koreans, who knows? It spins out of control. Those are not things that you can really get control over. I'd also like to raise one other possible segue. We aren't the United States wants to provide support to Israel, military support. Congress can't act.
Right. Yeah. That's the other
now, that's one thing, but if you're an enemy of the United States,
it's the greatest.
Can you don't you have to be able to? Don't you have to think about where else can we take advantage of this?
Sure. This is what
because it doesn't look like we're going to get a Speaker of the House anytime soon.
This is what Steinberg was saying before. It's like if you're focused inward, you're not paying attention to what's coming from outside.
If you attack the institutions, the courts, law enforcement, you diminish faith. You further are divisive.
Right.
You're further weakened. You don't believe the institutions can protect you because they're all corrupt. That's what Trump is telling us. Any institution is rigged. It, of course, makes us weaker domestically. It makes us weaker internationally. It's a terrifying scenario that Bill speaks to, but it's very true. You see, chaos happens. We act collectively out of madness at times. As long as there are people in the world whose religious faith or raison d'etre is to kill someone, we're going to have these issues. And it becomes incumbent on the community in which Hamas lives to help with that. It certainly is on Israel to relieve the stressors that fester and cause this madness, this pathological insanity to wantonly kill. It's like a hydra. There's so many heads that kind of got to take care of it. I don't know. I think it's intractable. I don't know how you come out of this other than getting whether Netanyahu having some introspection in Israel as to what are we as a state? What do we believe ourselves to be? How can we be a Jewish state, maintain Jewish morality, and yet conduct the war that we may have to conduct? Those are really significant, difficult issues to grasp it, because as Jews, we think of ourselves, and maybe wrongly, as having some morality when it comes to dealing with people and in war. And I just don't see that happening.
I mean, I think that every close Jewish friend that I have has reached out to me and made comments about how can we as the Jewish people displace 1.2 million people. Right. If anybody should be sensitive to that issue, it should be the Jewish people.
Correct.
I think it's really a trauma.
I think Blinken yesterday was saying in his speech, he says we're democratic nations. We have to behave like democratic nations and stuff like that. So I think this attempt by Israel to tell the UN that everybody in the part of the Gaza has to get out of there in 24 hours, which is just not enough
ridiculous
time.
You know what's interesting? Go ahead.
Not enough time. I mean, there's not enough Ubers in Gaza to get you out there. But it's
not enough fuel now.
It's untenable. But we also see, look, in the Middle East, it's the old biblical thing. It's an eye for an eye.
Right.
And if somebody takes your eye and you don't take their eye, they'll take both your eyes.
Well,
and there's a
eye for
feeling
an eye, tooth for a tooth. You know where that leads us? A lot of blind, toothless people.
Of blindness, right? Gandhi would say, an eye for an eye leads to blindness.
The issue was whether or not democracies can conduct the type of war they may have to conduct against terrorists or like Hamas and maintain their democratic nature. Do we adopt the cruelty, right? The disregard for human life to save a democracy, and in doing that, are we destroying the democracy?
Well, look at what's happening in places like Great Britain, where the Home Secretary wants to ban the Palestinian flag. France, which is banning any Palestinian demonstrations.
Mhm.
I mean, I think at this point the West has to really do some soul searching.
Right.
If this is a stress test. I think somebody said that before. If it can really withstand these issues, kind of like what we had to do in 2020. But Bill, I want to accept your gambit of segueing over. But actually, I saw the finger go up. Alan.
Yes, the finger. In September 11th, I think we saw that a lot of people were willing to give up our rights. Like they were taking people down in Guantanamo Bay. They were, booking them, whatever, without charging them, detaining people. And we were like, yeah, go ahead. You can wiretap anyone. We don't give a shit. Just we want to make us safe. And
scared.
People start giving up liberties when that happens. And
let me just say one more thing that's consistent with this. Thomas Friedman, in his first column after this, and he's emphasized it every time I've read anything more, when you're doing whatever you're going to do, you have to think about the day after.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of what we're saying here. Okay, you're going to go in there, you're going to kill however many people from Hamas you can kill. In the meantime, Gazans, regular people, of which there are plenty. Hamas doesn't give a shit about them, but there's tons of regular people there. And Friedman made the point, he did not back the notion of doing what they're about to get ready to do and go in there and just start, razing R-A-Z-I-N-G, meaning the entirety of Gaza. You have to think about the day after. And I don't know, when emotions are running high, when you guys are talking about 9/11, emotions are running high. Oh, sure, we'll wiretap everybody and all that stuff. Sounds great until you become the subject of it, or you get to sit down a little more cautiously. So I think that was a good summary of what he had to say about it. And
the median age of Gaza is something like 18. Half of those 2 million people who live there are children and teenagers. You better think about the next day. So
Yep.
And they didn't vote for Hamas in 2006, and actually neither did 40% others. But Steve, given the fact that you were talking about dating us as far as age, I think it's safe to say that all 6 of us remember the Jason Robards movie The Day After, dealing with Lawrence, Kansas going bye-bye in the Cold War.
One.
Yes, that was our generation's Roots. Actually, I take that back. Roots was our generation's Roots.
Thank you.
Anyway, yeah. Anyways, so I actually thought that 2 days ago that the white smoke had actually emerged from the Republican caucus chimney, anointing a new Speaker of the House. But it seems as though that's not true, and I must apologize for when I had sent out some of our topics. That it would have been Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise. Apparently, he has withdrawn his nomination bid, which kind of is scary because I think the only person on the ballot right now, at last I heard, was Ohio wrestling aficionado Jim Jordan.
Wrestling aficionado. He likes to watch men grapple. But yes, go ahead.
He was All-American wrestler at Iowa. He was a great wrestler himself. And then he wound up coaching over there where they had their own version of Doc Anderson. And either he knew what was going on or he didn't. But, of course, he says he didn't, just like no one at Michigan knew anything either.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, except everybody.
So along with Congress grappling with what's happening in the Middle East, there are a litany of other issues that are really
Saeed, I mean, not grappling with it, I think is what you meant.
Standing corrected, sir. What the hell's going on? And what is to happen?
The minority again, isn't it 8 or 5?
Yeah, I mean, look at it. Jordan doesn't have the votes. The last time I was on the show, I think I talked about this. My biggest fear, Jordan clearly doesn't get the votes, and nobody appears to be stepping up. Who's the temporary speaker guy, the bow tie guy?
The bow tie, yeah.
McCarthy,
Patrick McHenry.
That's it.
McHenry.
Yes.
He has refused to take on more responsibility. People have gone to him and said, "Look, why? Let's vote to give you some more authority or some temporary authority so we get back to work." And he said, "No, not me." And my big fear is that ultimately Trump's name's going to resurface, and those nuts, that he'll intimidate people into voting for me or else. And he's invested in this chaos.
No,
Nancy, I hope you're right.
He doesn't want this job. Right. He doesn't even know what it involves. I mean, all he knows.
I'm afraid to say what I'm about to say, Nancy, because I don't want to give Trump the idea. But
I'm sure he's watching.
Shutting down the. God knows what he watches. Shutting down the government and turning it into economic chaos is exactly what Trump would like to see, because that would prevent Biden from getting elected.
Yeah, but Bill, I mean, the one tiebreaker is he will never sit anywhere that Nancy Pelosi once sat.
I really hope you guys are all right. I'll tell you, my big fear, and I'd love to hear somebody come up with another argument, is I think that there are 8 nuts who want to shut down the government, who want to create havoc.
They do.
I don't know how we're going to stop that.
Yeah.
Now, there's an obvious solution, but nobody seems to be talking about it. A group of Democrats and a group of Republicans could decide to vote for the same person. But there aren't enough goddamn adults in the room to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's probably a few Republican Congress members, maybe from New York or something, where it might be palatable for the Democrats to get on board, but who knows?
Somebody I know here in Grosse Pointe threw out Elise Stefanik today. Who knows? Yeah, I know. Are any of them not? They all suck, So, but I have a feeling somebody like that, somebody who is shall we say, fascism curious, but isn't like all the way there yet. So that would be
on the way.
And
She
doesn't know how to do the job, but neither did Kevin McCarthy.
So Nancy, does that make it LGBTQ plus F? I mean, are you expanding the alphabet?
The alphabet soup, yeah, right.
We do have to go back to speaking of the madman, who weighed in on the whole Israeli thing.
And then 2 nights ago, I read all of Biden's security people. Can you imagine? National defense people. And they said, gee, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack from the north because that's the most vulnerable spot. I said, wait a minute. Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart. The press doesn't like when they say it. I said that President Xi of China, 1.4 billion people, he controls it with an iron fist. I said, he's a very smart man. They killed me the next day. I said he was smart. Whatever.
Jesus God, I can't stand
the biggest lie in that whole thing was he said, I read.
Yeah, exactly. I read. He does that thing with the hands, the accordion hands. It's just like
small hands. Well, apparently, Special Counsel Jack Smith has filed some paperwork suggesting that he knows the motive for Trump in the document case. And from the descriptions that have already made it into the media, that it seems as though he was telling anybody and everybody who would listen about our subs. It looks as though he was just simply strutting, that he was just trying to issue his own bravado. How would this affect the case?
See, I think when you talk about the documents and subs, I think he thought it was like a sandwich. That's why he was so excited about it.
But it's not on the McDonald's menu, Alan.
Yeah.
I mean, he was being disloyal to his own colon.
Now, I missed this. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, man.
I was just gonna say I was up north for a few days this week, so I missed the Jack Smith thing. What does he think his motive for?
He just said he knew it. Yeah. He just said that they had an explanation. He wouldn't disclose it.
Oh, he didn't disclose. Okay, all right.
But I'll leave it for Steve to discuss how the impact on the potential criminal defense. But in any litigation, in any courtroom I've ever been in, if you can even make an argument about a clear motive, you've gone a long way in proving your case. And if it's true, if there is a cogent motive argument that is beyond just bravado, I think this really puts Trump in some jeopardy.
Why does he need to go beyond bravado? If he's disclosing secrets, whether he's being braggadocious or not, that's the violation.
Well, no, I think what Bill is saying, you got to think like the trial lawyer, okay? And for the trial lawyer to be able to stand up in opening statement, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to show you what he did, but more importantly, we're going to tell you the thing that everybody's been wondering: why the hell did he do it? We're going to show you why he did it, and we're going to show you through Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith and some paperwork. And don't forget, every time he shoots his mouth off, it's on television, it's recorded, and they will use that. I'm telling you, as sure as we're all sitting here, they're going to have video of him, and they're going to say something like this, whether it's Smith or who had one of his compadres. They're going to say, don't take it from me, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here's what the defendant said, and then they'll play it as part of their opening statement. And I'm telling you, there's nothing more powerful. We go back to why did I think the Georgia case was the best case? Because it's him talking, and he can't say it's not him.
Yeah.
It's the same thing here. You'll have his punim, that means face, for the couple of you who aren't Jewish.
You knew that.
Who? You'll have his punim up there and him talking. And I absolutely, Bill is absolutely right. There's nothing better for a jury than an explanation of why it is that the defendant did what he's accused of doing. And if they really have something, it's going to be devastating to his case.
What if it's just
especially if it's financial? Especially if it's financial.
Yes.
On that question about the video, Fish, is poor lighting an affirmative defense? All right.
Yeah, and by the way, Bill, I think what Bill just said also, especially if it's financial, because that's consistent with everything else he's done in his life, and that'll be something he'll be able to also put in an opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that his motive was money. And you're not shocked to hear that. The evidence will show you that's the only thing he's cared about his entire life. Blah, 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 and off you go.
Yep. There you
And
go.
as you recall, Steve, in The Apprentice, he used Money, Money, Money by the Isley Brothers.
Oh,
He wouldn't know the Isley Brothers if he fell over.
Isley brothers. It's like the Isley.
One of them just died.
Well, one of them just passed away.
I know
Yeah.
that's besmirches the Isley brothers, who are awesome. So there we are.
Well, speaking of Republicans who are in a little bit of trouble, it looks like our favorite Long Island Congressman George Santos is back in the news with more fraud and identity theft, apparently scamming somebody's credit card to go live high on the hog. But word comes out now that a group of House Republicans from New York are introducing a resolution to expel him. Don't let anybody think that it's just the mafia in New York that take care of their own. The Republican caucus for Congress does the same.
That guy is unbelievable. I mean, it's like when you say hang on to your wallet around that guy, it's like it's literally hang on to your wallet.
That's not the way we say it, Nance. What we say is when you shake hands with the guy, count your fingers when you're done shaking hands.
Right. Okay. There we go.
Right.
So same
Bob
thing. Right.
Noska reminding you us. Thank you. It was Rudolph Isley who passed away.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Great music tradition. So with all of this other stuff happening in the world, there was a new poll taken here in Michigan, which shows that apparently President Biden is lagging behind by 7 percentage points against Trump. But Trump is also behind Gretchen Whitmer if Whitmer were to enter the race. Something like, I think it's 42 to 35% is what the poll said.
Who's our pollster friend? Lengel?
Ed Sarpolis.
Ed Sarpolis. I want to
Sarpolis.
hear Ed Sarpolis's thoughts on this poll, because I cannot believe that a state that reelected Gretchen Whitmer by 9 points over somebody. I mean, Tudor Dixon is no prize, but she makes Trump. I mean, next to Trump, she looks like Winston Churchill, and the idea that she could I got to think that poll's wrong.
I think the polls, it's so early. I sort of liken it to like going to a shoe store where you're like, I want to try on those shoes. Those look really cool. And you walk around for about a minute and you go, nah, never mind. I think people like to try on the different shoes, the different candidates, and go, yeah, that would be a fun candidate. And then about 10 minutes later, yeah, not really. I think it's early on where there's a lot of shoe shopping going on and people trying on different things.
I don't dispute that. I do think that one of the things that the poll reflects are Biden's negatives, and I can argue against them. I think they mainly involve his age and the amazing job that the Republicans have done convincing otherwise reasonable people. Oh, he's got dementia. Look, you can make a lot of allegations about Biden, but I don't think that one. I don't think that one applies.
And Bill, I would also add to that the perception that the economy is still terrible for everybody.
Right.
Which is amazing. It just happens to not be true.
Right.
But doesn't stop anybody from believing it. Apparently,
truth doesn't mean much.
Not nowadays. Not nowadays.
Truth is gone. It's we're in a post-truth.
Well, it's not gone. It's just not relevant.
Well, we're in a post-truth world, right?
Yeah.
Truth is what you make it. It's completely. That's why reality is so difficult to reconcile.
We have alternate facts.
And
Nancy.
if I was going to add one thing, I know we don't want to go back to Israel again, but
wait, are you denying us a right of return?
What Joel just mentioned is, I think, the other thing that we really need to keep in mind particularly if we're getting our news online, and even more particularly if we're even glancing at social media, because we have already seen, multiple cases of AI generated bullshit, of bot generated or bot propagated bullshit, and it's more important than ever to know who is giving you your news and whether you should be paying attention to it. Before we went on the air, I don't believe the decapitated baby story is 100% yet. We haven't had that confirmed by, legit news operations, but that's the one thing everybody wants to talk about. Oh, who would decapitate babies? So,
By the way, if you see any images on the internet of me dressed up like Sue Ellen Ewing from Dallas, that's actually true. I did it for a Spanish play in high school. Just putting it out there.
Yeah.
It's not a deep fake. But Alan, to add to your analogy about going shoe shopping, I mean, I remember being told all the time as a kid, your feet are growing, so don't buy the expensive shoes. Get the cheap shoes. And it seems as though we've got a bunch of cheap candidates right now. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely there. Well, why don't we go
I think you're right. I was going to say I think it's really about age. I mean, look, Joe Biden's not the perfect president, but I don't think we've ever had a perfect president.
Consider the alternative.
Yeah. And then if Trump is really still the amazing thing is the staying power of Trump. I mean, that he got 75 million votes the last time when we were like, no, this guy's going to get like 10 votes. And he got that many, and people are still, Jay Tapper was talking to some expert, and he was talking about Trump weighing in where some of the Jews were getting mad at Trump for like attacking Netanyahu and attacking Israel and criticizing them and promoting Hezbollah. And he said, do you think it's going to matter to his voters? And he says, I should have to pay $100 every time I ask that question because I know. And she said, maybe with the Jews and the Christian fundamentalists may be insulted by it. I mean, he's not going to get more votes, but the guy's got a base that is fucking loyal as you can get.
I mean, nobody's done it better that I've ever seen to sustain a lie, repeated lies, different lies, and sustain them and give them life.
Yep.
Right.
No question.
Well, maybe that one president who could have been perfect, but we'll never know, was William Henry Harrison, who died of pneumonia less than a month after taking office.
He had such promise.
He could have been a contender.
Mm-hmm. He could have started Weight Watchers.
Okay, Alan, let's go to commercial.
All right.
I'm Wayne County Treasurer Eric Sabri. We are living through unprecedented times. As a result, the Michigan Homeowner Assistance Fund was created. This fund, administered by the state of Michigan, is designed to help homeowners cope with pandemic-related hardships, such as delinquent property taxes. Residents may apply for up to $25,000 to help cover 2019, 2020, and 2021 tax years. Previous year's taxes must be paid in full or in a payment agreement with the Treasurer's office. Eligible homeowners must have a qualified financial hardship that occurred on or after January 21st, 2020. You must currently own and occupy your home as your primary residence and must have owned it since January 21st, 2020. To see if you qualify, please visit waynemetro.org, call 313-388-9799, or email taxinfo@waynecounty.com. We're here to help.
All right, it's that time.
Downtown Detroit, Robert Wells, Schmuck of the Week.
You had your hand up first, Nancy, or you were just stylizing it. So go first.
We're here to help. Okay, video. I'll go first.
There's a lawyer who's walking in that video with his bag. He looks so miserable in that, whatever. He looks so miserable.
Clip art, right? Exactly.
He needs a hug.
Okay.
Go ahead, Nancy.
For the second time, I am choosing a former occasional contributor to this very program, Mr. Charlie LaDuff, who had Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on his show, promoted it as relentlessly and flop sweatily as it's possible for a person who is clamoring for somebody to pay attention to him can do, and actually called him, I had to write this down, the most censored man in America.
Oh, God.
There you go. So RFK Jr. and censored. Poor guy, censored. And I'm kind of not a strict constructionist on the word censored. I mean, a lot of journalists will tell you that just because somebody won't let you talk on their particular platform doesn't mean you're being censored. That censorships can only be accomplished by the government or some official agency. But it's like calling a man who blames his vocal problems on a flu shot, somebody that you don't necessarily want to give a platform to, is not censorship. Thank you.
That's like an assassination is technically a political killing out in the open, and not what happened. Not what happened to the Broncos yesterday.
Yes, exactly. So there you go.
By the way, didn't RFK Jr.'s siblings like write an open letter disavowing him and basically saying Sirhan got the wrong RFK?
Three of them did, I believe. I don't know. There are so many Kennedys. They're like Saudi princes. There's just a million of them, and I know that there were like three of them who actually.
You mean they gamble and they womanize? And...
Yeah, exactly. So they're pretty thick on the ground, but at least three of them did that. So yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Fish.
Mine is none other than Steve Scalise. To begin with, I thought that his referring to himself as David Duke without the baggage in and of itself might have been, in a sane world, disqualifying from even being considered for the position like Speaker of the House. It should be disqualifying for the position of dog catcher. But Steve Scalise managed somehow to put his name in, go there as if he's pretending to do something, and then it's rather than fight for it when everything goes, he turns around and he says, "All right, I quit." And to me,
I'm out.
The combination of being David Duke without the baggage and then being a quitter puts him in mind of a guy who would not want shooting 1-1 at the end of the game when we're down 1.
Okay.
So Steve Scalise is my schmuck of the week.
And this guy was being touted as the moderate of the two between him and Jordan.
Yeah.
And as memory serves,
think about that.
Wasn't he the guy who blurted out "You lie" when Obama was giving the State of the Union?
No.
Oh, that was Alito.
No.
But no, Alito just shook his head. But I thought it was Scalise who.
I thought his name was Wilson or.
Yeah, and he wound up. He's renounced that group now. He actually ran, I think, again, but that wasn't Scalise.
It wasn't Scalise.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, Joel.
I'm going to piggyback with Steve. I think it's those 8 Republicans, I believe, who are holding the country hostage. We have government to run. We have a military to run. Tuberville is. I'm going to keep going. Tuberville pisses me off. He won't allow for the military to be ready. He won't allow people to be promoted. But it's
God made him kicked him down those plane stairs this week.
Yeah, he's an asshole. But those, you're holding the country. This is a democracy. It's compromise. It's discussion. It's dialogue. And to hold the country hostile for your nihilistic, desires is completely an abrogation of your duty. And they are the biggest schmucks and the biggest assholes that I can reference to.
All right. Thank you, Julie Johnston, for the kind words.
Yes.
I really appreciate that. Bill.
Oh.
You're muted, Bill.
Oh, you're muted.
Get the profanity out now.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Robert Kennedy was on my short list.
He can be on your. We can have twinsies.
For a different reason. Okay. It's his decision to try and screw up this upcoming election. Though I understand more Trump supporters would vote for him than Biden supporters, but who knows? But I think, to be serious for a moment, they're dual winners in my opinion. It's Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, as well as Netanyahu. I think together they've formed a less perfect union.
Yeah.
All right, Allan.
I am going to go with Vivek Ramaswamy, who
he was my number 2.
Apparently attacking Nikki Haley for supporting Israel, saying that she's basically bought and paid for. And he went on Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity is going, "What proof do you have she was bought and paid for?" And he's like, he's such, because he's got money, because he's a successful businessman, supposedly. He lords the superiority over everyone and this independence, and he's going to fade away very quickly. People are going to see through that he's a very bullshit candidate.
He's a Brahmin too, so
yeah.
So
and not from Boston.
Yeah.
By the way, our RFK, I have some people who I've had conversations with people who are Trump supporters, and they said, I could vote for RFK, and thinking I'm going to be like, wow, you're like, almost, and I go, he's a nut. And they go, really? And I go, yes.
Yeah.
Did you see that Vivek is also now talking about the insecurity of our northern border? Apparently, he went up to Canada in the New Hampshire Canada border in Quebec and claimed that you could walk in on a hiking trail, and so now we're going to have to build a 5,500 mile wall with a friendly nation.
What was he worried about? Sikh extremists and Quebecois coming across?
I have no idea. So.
Oh my God!
Okay, sorry.
What an embarrassment. Okay, I've actually got a runner-up who I think we need to mention, and that is South Carolina GOP Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who showed up at Congress wearing a large scarlet A as her blouse to go ahead and show that she's still standing after apparently the grief that she got for voting to oust former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. I thought that hat tip to the Nathaniel Hawthorne novel was quite apt, although I think it had more to do with Demi Moore. But yeah, Nancy.
I just want to add that as the only female on this panel, there are ways to display a red A on your chest and make that point visually without saying, look at my big tits. And she's definitely in the look at my big tits group. I mean, it was very close fitting. It was a huge A. She's like, and I'm like, come on, girl. It's like, be a serious person, but okay, never mind.
Well, thank you, Nancy, because I was going to say exactly that next, but now I don't
I'm
have
sorry.
to. No, I'm kidding. I wasn't going there at all.
Oh, I knew you wouldn't. But you're too nice.
but my real schmuck of the week is actually Schmucks as a collective, and that is all those sinful, transgressing Amish who got outed when their cell phones, which they weren't supposed to have, went off a week ago Wednesday, when the national emergency alert went off.
As somebody who has lived in Amish country, we're going to continue this. This is going to be the first thing we're going to talk about next week, as I know we're running over. But as somebody who's actually lived in Amish country, that's not entirely true that they're not allowed to have cell phones. But I can explain.
Do they live in Grosse Pointe? I didn't know they lived.
No, they lived all over Indiana. I have
never seen the buggy, Steve?
I have been in a buggy. I have been in the house, and I had the weirdest ever experience in my life, horror movie experience in my house of my life was in an Amish house. I can't even tell it because it's so disgusting. But go ahead. So,
did you by any chance participate in a barn raising?
No, no.
Well, then it doesn't count. I mean, so
anyway, so go ahead.
All right. Well, anyways, thank you all for being here. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you all for getting through. Really, I think one of our more difficult discussions, and doing so with some really great insight and maybe a little bit of levity involved there. So really appreciate that. Thank you, Steve Fishman. Thank you, Bill Seikaly. Thank you, Joel Sklar. Thank you, Nancy Derringer. And thank you, Allan, with the last word.
Drive home safely.
Happy Rumspringa, everybody, in case you're doing it this week.
Do you know, I can tell you,